Hello, Align fam. As promised, for the next Align experience, I will be releasing as we get closer to June 1st of the topics and things we're going to discuss, and also special guests who'll be leading the sessions. So today we have Ira.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And a little bit of background is I have never done breath work until literally last week with Ira, and it was honestly transformative. And I was like, this is definitely something that I want everyone to be more familiar with, the benefits of it. And I think a lot of you guys that are coming oftentimes don't realize how much stress and how many things and historical things that you're holding onto your body because that's what you're used to, but it's
Mhm.
actually hurting you and it's not beneficial. So
Mm.
today I obviously wanted to first introduce and highlight that Ida is joining us on June 1st,
Thank you.
and she's leading a breathwork session and also telling you guys like the benefits behind it. And for those of you coming that obviously want to prep and get ready for the experience and kind of do a little bit of homework before you come, that's why we're doing this episode. So
Mm.
Ira, thank you so much. I'm so excited to bring your practice to everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share this practice, which has been life-changing for me and for so many. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So I think first things is I kind of highlighted it, but what are some symptoms of us humans being either in stress, misaligned, hurting our body, on our way to illness and disease? What are some things we should be mindful of?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I believe that the one of the biggest elements that I've noticed in the majority of people, populations all over the world, and even collectively, we're noticing a crisis that is born from this mind-body disconnection. Oftentimes, we are living all over our heads and inside of our heads, yet not necessarily dedicate enough time to really bring ourselves into a connection with a deeper aspect of ourselves. We function a lot on logic. We overly exercise our logic, and we have been kind of sort of encouraged to disconnect from aspects of ourselves that are more intuitive, more wholesome, in a sense, more ancestral. And in that way, we're actually moving further away from a deeper intelligence that it's accessible to us at all times. And the simple means of our breath is something that brings us immediately back into our connection. I know that one of my teachers always said that breath is the bridge between the conscious mind and the higher intelligence, as well as the capacity for exercising our full potential. And when we think about it, breath is something that we come into the world and is the first thing that we do. And it's our most intimate friend. It's the carrier of our entire life, the one life force that sustains our life going every single day. And it is the last thing that we're actually going to release before we leave the world. And thus, it knows our behavior, our most intimate secrets, but it also knows our deepest inner knowing, and it carries the codes of our behavior. And thus, it is really a door that swings both ways because our breath is directly affected by the way our mindset is functioning and our nervous system states. But we also have the capacity and the ability to utilize our breath, swinging it the opposite way to take partial control of our nervous system, which will then directly and positively will influence our mindset.
Love that. And you were 100% right. I think a lot of things that we see in our body and even our mindset is that disconnection. So if we can pinpoint, what are some, I guess, symptoms, like physical symptoms, mental,
Yeah.
emotional symptoms of like we are misaligned and something
Yeah.
a little off.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And some of the common things that we experience firsthand is a lot of us are moving through the world with completely uninterrupted digestive systems, right? A lot of us have a lot of digestive issues, like we're unable to digest our food. We're unable to actually even feel that we're feeling nourished and nurtured by the food that we eat. We experience a lot of gas reflexes and acid reflexes. And that in itself is not, of course, something that is wrong with our digestive system, but often the digestive system becomes interrupted because our nervous system is retrieving part of our energy and most of our physiological organ systems for that sense of survival. It's actually retrieving it because we're undergoing a lot of stress. And that is what then escalates to the point of burnout, depression, lack of motivation, lack of inspiration, not even knowing ourselves or what really we really want in life, right? And so it almost feels like we're all walking heads without an actual body. And the body itself, which is, in my understanding and my belief, what keeps the score and also the endless wisdom of ourselves, It's actually not being tended to oftentimes. And so a lack of self-care, it's actually a symptom, even a lack of self-worth and lack of value is often even a symptom. So it doesn't necessarily is experienced on a physical level, but also on an emotional level and on a psychological level, right? A lot of individuals even suffer from insomnia. How many of us oftentimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about something about work or something in our familiar personal lives, and we can't really seem to fall asleep. We can't even seem to sit down and have a meal, right? And so even when we do that, we're not feeling nourished. And I believe that health is the composition or the embracing of all aspects of ourselves,
Mm,
right? We can say that even if we take care of our physical body, like we're fit, we're strong, and we're able and capable physically, if something is wrong with our emotional health or our psychology, we're not going to feel fulfilled. We're not going to feel empowered. We're not going to feel like we're actually moving in the world in the right direction. Even if our mental health is properly fixed, if our physical body is not being tended to in many, many ways, we're actually not feeling wholesome. And so health is defined by really taking into account all aspects of yourself, your physical body and all the desires and the cravings and the yearnings that come with that, your emotional body and every single emotion that oftentimes we label some as good and some as bad, right? And our mental health, which then in correlation and in connection with all of this helps us really be purposeful living beings. Yeah.
love that. And one important thing, because I think a lot of us who live in any type of city, metropolitan city, stress is just chronic and it's continual and it's just a part of everyday life, right? And that comes through our nervous system. It comes through a fight, flight, or freeze, right? So let's dive a little bit deeper on the nervous system and breath, right? Because there's a strong connection. How does breath work? How does your practice help regulate or at least cool down a bit our nervous system?
Yeah. And so breath work, as you mentioned, stress is unrelenting. It's coming our way at all times. And so we need to develop mechanisms and tools, or as I like to call it, resources for us to learn how to cope and navigate that stress, right? And part of that process is learning how to discharge and restore our body's ability to be at ease and to assimilate and integrate and find its way back to rest. And so with breath work, yes, we are moving through a process that potentially will invite a certain sense of activation in the nervous system, but it's a self-induced process, which means that it's a conscious choice. When I'm making a conscious choice, I'm in complete control of my experience. And with that comes that I actually get to address some of the unprocessed, stressful material that is stored in my body because stress and issues are stored within the tissues, my friends. And so when we're able to really activate the nervous system, we are basically moving the body through the natural hierarchy process of healing. We need a certain sense of activation and mobilization in order to tackle these stressful tasks that are coming at us all the time. Yet, if we don't complete the response or find a way back to parasympathetic dominance, then the body itself just stays within that cycle like a broken record. And so, breath work, again, brings us in the conscious choice of bringing ourselves into a place of activation. In other words, a sympathetic activation within our nervous system so that any unprocessed material can actually be looked at, can be felt, can be held, right? And then from there, further assessed. And when we do that, then we have the option of releasing anything that actually doesn't really belong in the body or doesn't belong in the mind. We get to really release negative patterns of self-talk. We get to release and process some of the emotions that we didn't really have the space or the proper support or the resources to hold and experience. And from that, when we get to complete that response, naturally the body returns to a parasympathetic state of dominance. And
Mm,
what that means is that we then help the body and de-escalate from that sense of stress. We help the body kind of remove any energetic or emotional waste that is not really meant to exist in the body. And so with that comes that after a breathwork session, we might feel very energized, very clear, very motivated, very inspired. And oftentimes we feel like we can actually get into deeper states of rest, right? Because we're moving through or resetting the natural process of the nervous system, and we know how to heal. I believe in this concept of organicity, that it's in somatic psychology, this belief that your body is self-correcting, self-directing, and self-healing. Yet that process gets interrupted oftentimes because our beautiful thinking, rational, logical brains often tells us to deviate from what is actually intuitively true to us.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of the reasons, because that is another conversation, of course, we have to find our way back to our body. We have to find our way back to that place of rest and assimilation. And thus, this practice often brings us into that place where we're really resetting and boosting our capacity to go from that state of stress and come back down to rest, right? Oftentimes, most of us have just been staying right here, stress, stress, to the point where we only function well and are able to complete our tasks only if we're under pressure. And so imagine if we were able to really efficiently show up at work, show up in our relationships, and show up in life, period, with that same capacity, with that same stamina, but from a place of deep rest and clarity. And that's what Brixus gives us. It really brings us into that place of deeper awareness, deeper connection. And that's the only place that we can actually make a proper choice.
I love that. I've, as you know, and I've already told so many of my close friends about it. I've been like, oh my God, you need to say Ira, like you need to do this. And people ask me like, what was your experience like? Right. And I think it's important for me to share for those of you who are new to all this. Just summarizing what Ira mentioned, it's as someone who's operated my entire life in stress, like fight, flight, and it's also self-induced because to your point, right? It a little bit to me, it's like if I'm not over functioning, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's gonna
Mhm.
come. Like you have to go after what you want. That's kind of the mindset I was kind of raised in by society, by the industry I was in,
Mhm.
right? And so I didn't realize I was operating at this level. And when you're always on this level, right? You don't have time to process things that maybe you didn't want to even touch or things that were traumatic or things that were emotional. So I think what the first thing I realized, and there's points where I really appreciated you because you were there, you're watching in person, you knew when to touch. Like I'll never forget when there was a part about just feeling safe and grounded. You touched the end of my foot, like the
Mhm.
back of my foot, and I literally felt grounded. So I think
Mhm.
the stages of what I personally went through with breath work, which is different for everybody, but
Mhm.
mine was I first felt like safe, grounded to just be. Like I don't have to
Mhm.
run anywhere. I don't have to do anything. Just being,
Yeah.
like you said, like feel yourself being physically held by the couch, right? That was something that was super grounding, just to be like, girl, calm the hell down, chill out, right?
Mhm.
I felt that like drop, right? Then it became very clear of, okay, what else was stored in my body that I was like, oh my God, that memory was still there. And it wasn't for me traumatic reliving it. It was more of like, kind of like I was watching a scene in a movie, but I was not
Mhm.
attached to it. And I was
Mm.
able, right? And we talked about, we deep after of like, oh, I actually created that scenario. I actually literally was a co-creator of that environment and I realized how I got there. But there was no more guilt, there was no more fear, there was no more trauma behind it. It was like really seeing and a situation that I didn't know was still stored in my body with fresh new eyes and
Mm.
no emotional attachment behind it, but pure release, right? The
Mhm.
second stage was releasing things that came up that I know was still there. And then third is to your point, when your monkey brain, the overdoing, over logic goes down, right? I had so many crazy downloads of like what really mattered to me in my life. Like, who am I? Why am I here? Why is this life that I want to live important and how I want to go about it? Right. So
Yeah.
it was very clear to your point. You get very crystal clear and rooted on who you are and what impact you want to make and what
Mhm.
doesn't freaking matter and what matters. Right. It was very clear, like night and day. Um, and the last part to your point was really inspiration. It was very like
Mhm.
excitement. I'll never forget I like you were like rounding down. I would literally want to like bounce out of the couch and start like doing the things that I was thinking about doing, things that I was really excited about. But I was like, all right, girl, just go through the meditation, finish it up. And then you mentioned like a week after, kind of see how your body reassesses because everyone recovers differently. To your point, I just realized I've never really had deep rest. So I've been feeling tired in the sense of like I just had a massage and I want to
Mhm.
rest. It wasn't
Yeah.
like it was so weird. I'm like, I didn't really do that much. Like, I know I went to the gym, like, I shouldn't feel this sore, right? But it was
Mhm.
really like relief.
Hmm.
And then my digestion went back to normal. Like things were kind of functioning again. I was sleeping in more normal times, sleeping longer. And I think I'm still in that kind of Zen mode of like, what was the word, when you integrate back
Hmm.
into reality?
Yeah, self-integrated. Yeah.
Right. So like just sharing my experience, because the way that I think when you share it so beautifully, I just want to ground people, be like, this is the actual experience that you may have. Yours will be
Hmm.
different. This is what I went through, right?
Yeah.
Loved it. And then you kind of mentioned the benefits of breath work,
Hmm.
and being more aligned, being, kind of reducing our cortisol, so we don't, cortisol is literally poison for our body with excessive use in time, which is
Hmm.
what we're doing every single day. So
Hmm.
uh, let's talk a little bit about the history, right? Because this is not new. I know everyone now is like, oh my God, wellness, breath work, but this has been used by our ancestors. So you want to talk a little bit about the history and like why our ancestors used it, discovered, and maybe if you even know, like, how come now in the last, I don't know, couple decades, it's coming back again?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And so part of the practicality and technique is kind of pulled from the incredible time proven science of yoga and Ayurveda. This is kind of sort of arising from ancient India. And of course, that has made its way throughout the entire world because, as I mentioned, it is time proven. It is a practice that is simple. It is a practice that is bringing you back to yourself.
Yeah,
And it really hones into this idea that you already, as this incredible human, are self-directing, self-correcting, and self-healing. Like there's absolutely nothing that you need from the outside world to help you be your best self.
yeah,
And yoga, it's a practice that believes that self-awareness is the key to self-transformation and success. And I strongly believe that. And I think that modern transpersonal psychologists and trauma therapists, such as Stan Grof and Christina Grof, which were basically the ones that reawoke and gave this new modality to the world because they pulled from yogic teachings as well as a lot of research around complex PTSD back in the 60s and 70s. They kind of sort of like blended both of those two worlds, both Western modern psychology and everything coming from uh his name is escaping me right now. I'll come back to it. But basically modern blending that world of Western psychology with Eastern philosophy, and kind of sort of like exploring the medicinal purposes and functions of psychedelics. Back in the 70s, they kind of sort of started exploring with different patterns of breath. And it's kind of like an unconventional new age practice that was developed in 1970s without using drugs as a potential therapeutic tool. Now, in many countries now, practitioners really utilize this technique as a spiritual practice rather than the therapeutic one and for as a tool for personal growth and personal development. I find that when I first discover it, the first few words that came into my mind is like, this is the only and most effective tool that I found in the world to up level and to enhance my brain capacity. Like right now, I feel like I see things clearly, not only myself, but the world, my surroundings, and my perception of who I am and the ways that I need to show up in the world have shifted. And so with this practice, Stan Grof and Christina Grof conducted a lot of research, and were utilizing first a lot of veterans that were coming from the war and were experiencing symptoms of complex PTSD and trauma. And so they started exploring the different breath patterns that these individuals were experiencing and engaging in while they were under the influence of psychedelic drugs.
mm,
And they were using LSD at the time, yet the war on drugs kind of sort of like interrupted that process. And what they did was like, wait a minute, they were breathing in certain patterns and all of a sudden they were accessing different and even more profound altered states of consciousness. So what would happen if we were to study that and start to really explore the regulation of our breath? Because we already know that it gives us partial control to our autonomic nervous system, right? The respiratory kind of function in the body is something that we can't necessarily control, or at least that's what we used to think. Yet now with modern research, we've come to realize that with deeper conscious breath, we're able to actually enhance sympathetic activation or trigger parasympathetic dominance in the body. That means that I can actually bring myself into a state of motivation if I need to, or I can bring myself into a place of rest if I need to. And with that, I have control of where I go and how my responses are going to be. And so Stan Groff and Christina started developing this technique that kind of sort of like um, uh, brought in that controlled, rapid, very quickening breathing patterns to influence our mental, our emotional, and physical states. It is often referred to as a practice that can get us into altered states of consciousness, but ultimately, I like to think about it as a practice that can get us into a dreamlike state or a deep meditative state in which we have the capacity to deeply reflect about who we are and what's being presented, because it actually ultimately brings us into a deeper connection of our body. And as I mentioned earlier, the body keeps the score of our whole lives. And so what we're not necessarily logically coming in contact with, the body is still holding. And it's still in the backgrounds directing the ways that we move and make decisions in our life, right? And so with that kind of came this beautiful practice and kind of like the framework for self-healing, where if we control the breath that simple means that we have access to it at all times and it's actually free, right? If we learn how to utilize it and harness it, then we're able to really come in contact with some of the greatest potentials in our life and as a human being. But yeah, it's from the 70s and it's been moving through the world fast and rapidly. And now I feel like it's kind of coming to a greater rise, specifically because everything that we've been doing to cope with stress is not necessarily working. I find that society has been numbing themselves through stress.
Yeah.
And we are actually coming or even running faster into burnout from those choices that we're making, because the reality is that we are living under stress at all times, if not social, now also on top of that, environmental. And
Yeah.
so now we have this beautiful capacity to, or the need really, we have the need to find a different tool that is more sustainable.
Yeah.
And this practice, given that our breath not only sustains our life every single day, is actually able to sustain deeper aspects of our healing and our self-connection.
I love that. It's funny. You mentioned like LSD and like other ways of like therapy when they were performing it, right? I couldn't even imagine what I would have seen or tripped if I took mushrooms on that. I will never forget, I was telling my sister and my friends about like close friends about my experience, right? People that I trust. They're like, whoa, you had experience. I was like, yeah, I didn't do shit. Like I didn't take a single drug. I've never done nothing against drugs, but I've just never done any of it. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, I think I want to stay away from mushrooms for a while. I'm just going to use pure breath. Um,
Yeah.
Super helpful. And I definitely wanted to share this. I want this to be a teaser for everyone coming to know A, these are the things that we're going to talk about, but in depth. And B, most importantly, is Ira is actually going to walk and guide every single group through a kind of very somatic, meditative experience of breath work. Basically, what she normally does in a 2 hour session, she's going to do like a mini version of it, which we're super excited. But
Mm.
as a takeaway, because I guarantee everyone watching this is going through some type of stress, Ira, can you walk us through an example of, say, we had 2 to 3 minutes and we need to cool down, like we're walking into a meeting, we're going to perform, or like we just came out of a very heated conversation. What's a quick breath work technique we can use?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on where we are in our states, right? And so let's say that we're feeling really overwhelmed and our mind is reeling with thoughts, right? So there's this technique called the Brahmari in Sanskrit, which refers to as the bumblebee breath. And you cover your ears, you cover your eyes, and you kind of create that bumblebee vibration. And you can make at least any from 5 up to 10 repetitions of that practice. Inhale deeply and fill the entire body with breath. And then as you cover your ears and eyes, you kind of create that bumblebee sound vibration. And the vibration itself can overpower oftentimes the voices and the activity in the mind. And on a nervous system level, we're really stimulating the pineal and pituitary glands. So it's giving the body hormonally a lot of an antidote to the excess cortisol and adrenaline that it's rushing through the body, right? And so it might look or sound like that. And you kind of ride the wave of the exhale all the way to the end. As soon as you finish, inhale one more time and then exhale completely all the way. And again, minimum of 5 repetitions of that. The louder oftentimes or the stronger the vibration, the more clarity and peace comes usually to the mind. So that's often a really quick and easy one. And not necessarily breath, But another therapeutic tool that it's quite effective and it's quite fast is to identify that when we are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, that is something that we can label as a cue of danger or cue of disconnection. And with that word, right, cue of disconnection, if we're disconnected, we're not going to be able to actually efficiently come up and achieve our goal, right? And so that means that I can actually train my brain to identify a cue of safety or cue of connection in the moment where I become aware of how I am experiencing overwhelmed and I'm coming from an out of body and more into a headspace experience, right? And so thinking about the spaces that you inhabit, regardless of that being your home, your school, or your workplace, right? What is something that you can have, an object, an image, a smell that reminds you one more time that you are safe and that you got this? And that's going to be your cue of safety or cue of connection. Those two things combined are effective, are quick, and within a few minutes, if not a few seconds, you're probably going to be right back into your body. And that's the place where real strength comes from. That's the place where you actually feel whole.
I love that. I'll never forget when the beginning, first I'm doing breath work with you, right? Or anybody. It you have a sense of like shame a little bit because you're like repeating all these sounds and noises, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna think I'm crazy. Like my neighbor's gonna think I'm crazy. But you kept saying, and I really appreciate it, but it's a basically you're in a safe space, right? Feel free to like go where your body wants to go and like emit the sounds it wants, creating that non-judgmental safe space. I think that was so important, and I feel like that's
Mhm.
probably huge in breath work, right? Because sometimes like we feel like we can't be too loud, we have to act a certain way, we like, we can't do this in public. That like just being able to be free to let my body and my voice and my mind go wherever it needs to go, I think
Yeah.
that was super powerful and healing.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
um,
And to just piggyback right on that, like the beauty about experiencing that in collective spaces, because like a lot of us have resistance to doing that or reaching and unleashing ourselves in that way, even when we're alone. But when we do that in collective spaces, we actually train ourselves to become more human.
yeah,
We train ourselves to be in more relationship with each other in our normal ways of actually being in our bodies. And oftentimes, a lot of the things that we've given a social connotation of unacceptable are ways that we all experience, are things that we all feel, and things that connect us all. And the more that we can kind of unlearn that process, right? Of course, there's a place for everything and everything in its place, right? But this is a consentful, really intuitive, and very safe space that we consciously choose to create. And when we share that experience in the collective, we're actually really healing collectively and we're shifting the energetics of what it is to actually be in relationship with other beings and to be more natural and to really normalize feeling, to normalize conscious and authentic expression. Because oftentimes we show up in spaces and we're actually performing. And we are not even performing from a place of understanding who we really are. And that performance is actually even disjointed. And so when we actually allow ourselves to unleash the shackles that keeps us tied and boxed in, we're actually really setting ourselves free to be more authentic, to be more free, and to feel that freedom that we're all really seeking, but potentially be looking for it in all the wrong places.
100%. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited for you. It's gonna be your first time with the line experience, but that's exactly why. One of the reasons why I created the line experience was to create a non-judgmental, safe space. Even the dress code is dressed as your favorite self, your best self, whatever that means, right? There, like I always, and I told you, like as women, you're not gonna have to wear like business suits, right? You want to wear something that's gonna show off your curves, you go and do that. Like it's I think to your point, it's that elevation and that mindset we can get when we feel safe and we're not
Mhm.
having fight or flight, right? We're actually going to higher mind. So I'm
Yeah.
so excited for you to obviously lead a session, but also be part of the experience. And I always ask this of all my guests who come on. I believe every single person has a gift that when you use it and you unlock it, you help heal humanity. And
Mhm.
you also, elevate the consciousness of everyone around you. So, what do you think your unique gift is?
Hmm. I think I'm here in the world to be a mirror for people to see their value in the world and to see their worth. More than anything, to remember their value and to remember their worth
Yeah.
without necessarily having to execute or complete a task. to actually reconnect and reclaim their sense of self and self-worth, from not a place of doing, but rather a place of being. And if we can understand that the more that we become comfortable in our own bodies, we will become comfortable existing and coexisting in the body of the world, the more beautiful our world will be. And so I'm interested in just helping people walk back to themselves, and then by that, ultimately help each other be more empowered.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much, Ira.